A spirit haunts the year's last hours, dwelling amid these yellowing bowers. To himself he talks, for at eventide, listening earnestly, at his work you may hear him sob and sigh. In the walks, earthward he boweth the heavy stalks of the mouldering flowers. Heavily hangs the broad sunflower over its grave in the earth so chilly. Heavily hangs the hollyhock, heavily hangs the tiger lily. In Tennyson's song, from his 1830 collection of poems, chiefly lyrical, death is presented through somebody who is already alive, referred to as a spirit. What the word death means in this poem, though it is only used once in the second canto, is the renunciation of not simply life, but living. The spirit is not physically dead, but has become so disillusioned with life due to his realization of the futility of his work that he is as good as dead, like the symbolic sunflower that heavily hangs over its grave in the earth. It and the spirit are as good as dead in their appearance of death and in its inevitability and proximity. An aubade is a poem or piece of music that is traditionally written about lovers separating at dawn. An example would be John Donne's poem, The Sun Rising, where the speaker asks, "Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run?" 344 years later, Philip Larkin asked a similar question in his own aubade, though without the use of any question marks. Waking at 4 to soundless dark I stare. In time the curtain edges will grow light. Till then I see what's really there. Unresting death, a whole day nearer now. The speaker asks the dawning day why it must tear them away from the realization and comprehension of their own death. Who is the lover that they reluctantly separate from as the new day dawns? Larkin presents his own spirit, someone that is so resigned to their own death that they practically enact it. The speaker writes that death is a small, unfocused blur, a standing chill that slows each impulse down to indecision, much like death itself does. However, where Tennyson's spirit embraces death out of the futility of his own work, Larkin's escapes it through the same. The final line of the poem is, "Postmen, like doctors, go from house to house," a concluding statement of pretended ignorance on behalf of the speaker, treating everyday mundanities as if they were in themselves nurseries, curing us of the death that they, quote, know, have always known, and know that we can't escape. Perhaps we shouldn't view Larkin's intertwining of death with love and sexuality as unusual, at least within the context of the Western canon. 107 years previously, Dante Gabriel Rossetti wrote Nuptial Sleep. At length their long kiss severed with sweet smart, as the last slow sudden drops are shed from sparkling eaves when all the storm has fled, so singly flagged the pulses of each heart, their bosoms sundered with the opening start of married flowers to either side outspread from the knit stem, yet still their mouths, burnt red, fawned on each other where they lay apart. Sleep sank them lower than the tide of dreams, and their dreams watched them sink and slide away. Slowly their souls swam up again, through gleams of watered light and dull drowned waves of day, till from some wonder of new woods and streams he woke and wondered more, for there she lay. Rossetti here gives us an answer to the previous poem in the House of Life, entitled The Kiss, in which the question is asked, what smouldering senses in death's sick delay or seizure of malign vicissitude can rob this body of honour or denude this soul of wedding raiment worn today? In other words, could even the approach of death mar the love that the speaker bears for the subject of the poem? Or could the subject mar that relationship or appear less desirable were they facing the approach of death? And the answer given by Nuptial Sleep is not simply a no, but a presentation of sexual union that involves undergoing a death of some kind, only to be reborn into a new life. A spiritual union that the modernist poet Hart Crane attested to in his Voyages, a long love poem about his relationship with Emil Opfer, a Danish sailor. No justice can truly be done to any Hart Crane poem if it is not read from start to finish, so no justice will be done here. Crane writes that sleep, death, desire close round one instant in one floating flower, presenting the death of individuals for their physical union. The floating flower refers to the merging of flesh so that a new, beautiful thing is created, and the individuals are reborn, opened up to what Rossetti called new woods and streams. In this, these poets present a very different kind of death to Tennyson, as theirs is one of leaving the self behind to experience a new awakening, to almost be a new being. The natural conclusion to desire, whereas Tennyson's is one of leaving the self behind to become nothing, to become dead. A view that the character Blanche echoes in Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire, where she refers to death as the opposite of desire, a void in which the senses are rendered null. A link between death and desire is intriguingly crafted in Sarah Kane's 1998 play, Cleansed, in which a large element of the plot consists of the character Grace attempting to overcome the death of her brother Graham. Grace dresses herself in his clothes and appears to get institutionalized, though the nature of the institution is unclear. She is joined by her dead brother, who she imitates, copying the way he speaks, the way he dances, and his facial expressions, before declaring, "Love me or kill me, Graham," and having sex with him. Obviously, this is a much stranger example of a kind of mimetic desire, but is, at its most deconstructed, relatable. Grace wants her brother back and will do anything she can to keep him with her, even if that means losing herself to become him, with the declaration to love me or kill me being deeply ironic, as Grace becomes, at the end, completely unable to speak as herself or for herself, with the character of Graham being the one that lives on through her. The sexual desire here could be precisely the same as Crane and Rossetti's conceptions of sexual unification, as Grace wants to have sex with Graham so that she can sacrifice herself to become him, with the ironic declaration meaning, "Love me so that I can become you, or I'll kill myself," and of course the whole desire of Grace to become her brother until she no longer exists could represent mourners that focus so much on the person that they've lost out of a need for them to be with them, that they lose all sense of their own importance and self-worth. But perhaps one of the greatest attempts to cope with death in the entire Western canon is Walt Whitman's long poem to Abraham Lincoln, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Whitman fully embraces death, declaring, "Not for you, for one alone, blossoms and branches green to coffins all I bring. For fresh as the morning, thus would I chant a song for you, O sane and sacred death, all over bouquets of roses. O death, I'd cover you over with roses and early lilies, but mostly and now the lilac that blooms the first, copious I break the sprigs from the bushes. With loaded arms I come, pouring for you and the coffins, all of you, O death." And what he calls his trinity of extended metaphors harmonizing with the chant of his soul, which is both the poem itself and his need to confront death, so that he can reconcile his eternal love for Lincoln with his death and the nature of death itself, which he does through the acceptance of eternity. His lilacs blooming perennial, and the great star in the western sky shining forever, too. This almost celebratory morning is not one shared by Virginia Woolf, though she, too, presents the all-consuming nature of death that Whitman conveys when he speaks of the sure enwinding arms of cool enfolding death. In The Death of the Moth, Woolf could be said to present a more trivial morning, though it is arguably morning all the same. She writes, "One could only watch the extraordinary efforts made by those tiny legs against an oncoming doom which could, had it chosen, have submerged an entire city, not merely a city, but masses of human beings. Nothing, I knew, had any chance against death. Nevertheless, after a pause of exhaustion, the legs fluttered again. It was superb, this last protest, and so frantic that he succeeded at last in righting himself. One's sympathies, of course, were all on the side of life. Also, when there was nobody to care or to know, this gigantic effort on the part of an insignificant little moth, against a power of such magnitude, to retain what no one else valued or desired to keep, moved one strangely. Woolf seeks to show us both how insignificant and significant our own struggles against death are, since the moth is easily overcome by death, but it, too, seems to Woolf to put up a large resistance against it, something that is common to almost all forms of life. Our struggle against death being an essential part of what makes us living. But obviously, Woolf's major confrontation with death is in her 1927 novel, To the Lighthouse, in which it is accepted through each major character fulfilling the aims they had set out before the death occurred, through the collective act of sailing to the lighthouse. This collective act, in a sense, fulfills the conflicting desires of the characters that are revealed through the exploration of their individual minds, and so is both an emblem of the nature of accepting death and finishing the unfinished, and of granting the wishes of the one who is deceased, no matter how implicit those wishes are. This kind of storytelling, in which various voices are in conflict with each other, is also utilised by William Faulkner in his novel As I Lay Dying, in which death is also accepted through the fulfilment of the wishes of the deceased, but doesn't reconcile the characters, but instead drives them further apart. Faulkner presents a death that is completely unforgiving, and that the attempt to grant the wishes of the deceased produces consequences that would be clearly against their wishes. This is the death that Larkin presents, one that is simply nothing, one that it would be futile to do anything for, or to attempt to reconcile anything living with. Clearly, one of the greatest of all writers on death, and one of the greatest of all writers full stop, is Emily Dickinson. To conclude, here is her 1863 poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labour and my leisure too for his civility. We passed a school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain, we passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity.